They called us the golden couple, Emily and me, Carter. Everywhere we went, people noticed us. I used to joke that Emily's smile could stop traffic, and mine could keep it moving. We weren't just good-looking. We were happy, the kind of couple people envied. Our mornings started with coffee and shared newspaper jokes. Our evenings were filled with walks, wine, and quiet conversations about the future. I thought we were untouchable. And maybe that's where my first mistake was, believing that something so perfect could never crack. Then came the day the new neighbors moved in. It was impossible to miss them. Tom and Jessica arrived in a shiny black SUV, unloading a ridiculous number of boxes. Emily and I watched from our window, sipping iced tea like nosy old retirees. "Wow," Emily said, raising her eyebrows as Tom pulled off his sunglasses. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had that effortless charm, the kind that made you hate him on sight if you weren't him. "He looks like he walked off the set of a movie." I laughed. "Yeah, one of those rom-coms where the hot guy turns out to be a jerk." Emily smirked but didn't take her eyes off him. A tiny knot formed in my chest, but I brushed it off. Jessica, on the other hand, was an enigma. She was striking, long, dark hair, and a sharpness in her features that made her look like she belonged on the cover of a fashion magazine. But she had this permanent, "don't mess with me" expression. A few days later, they invited us to a barbecue. I was hesitant. I liked my weekends peaceful, without forced neighborly bonding. But Emily, ever the social butterfly, insisted we go. So there we were, standing in their yard, plastic cups of lemonade in hand. Tom was grilling steaks, flashing that Hollywood smile at Emily as he joked about his grilling skills. Jessica stood beside me, arms crossed, looking as unimpressed as I felt. "Your wife seems to like Tom's sense of humor," she said, sipping her drink. I laughed nervously. "Yeah, he's charming, I guess." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Or obnoxious. Take your pick." We both chuckled, and for a second, I thought maybe we'd survive this awkward neighbor thing after all. But something shifted after that day. Emily started mentioning Tom more often. "Tom's hilarious. He told me this story today about his college days. You'd love it," she'd say with a laugh. Or, "I ran into Tom while walking to the store. He's just so nice, isn't he?" Every mention was a needle prick to my chest, and each time I tried to brush it off, that knot tightened a little more. One evening, I came home to find Emily in the kitchen, cooking dinner with a bright, distracted smile on her face. I kissed her cheek, but she barely noticed. "What's got you so happy?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, then shrugged. "Oh, nothing. Just life." But her eyes told a different story. I wanted to believe it was innocent, that I was reading too much into things. After all, Emily and I had something real, something solid, didn't we? But deep down, a quiet voice whispered, "Your perfect life isn't as perfect as you think." As the days turned into weeks, that whisper grew louder, and soon, it would become a scream I couldn't ignore. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, one of those afternoons where the sky felt heavy, like it was holding a secret it couldn't wait to drop on someone's head. I came home early from work, drenched from the downpour, holding a bouquet of flowers I'd picked up on a whim. Emily loved lilies. I thought maybe things had fell off because I'd been distracted, not her. Maybe a small gesture would bring things back to normal. The house was quiet, too quiet. I kicked off my wet shoes and walked toward the living room. That's when I heard it, a low murmur of voices coming from the back sunroom. I froze, straining to listen. Emily's voice, and then his. I moved toward the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked through the crack, I felt my entire world tilt. There they were, Emily and Tom, sitting far too close, her hand resting on his knee, their faces inches apart, sharing a moment that should have belonged to me. The flowers slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a soft rustle. The sound must have startled them because Emily's head snapped up. She saw me and went pale. "Carter," she whispered. Tom turned too, his face unreadable but calm, like he was used to this kind of thing, like he didn't care that he was destroying lives. The rage hit me like a tidal wave. I slammed the door open, making Emily flinch. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. My voice cracked, betraying the pain beneath my fury. Emily scrambled to her feet. It's not what it looks like. Really? I laughed bitterly, pointing at Tom. So you weren't just cozying up with this clown? Tom stood, raising his hands. Look, man. Don't, I warned, stepping closer. Just don't. At that exact moment, Jessica stormed in from the back entrance, soaking wet from the rain. She must have seen Tom's car parked outside and followed her instincts. Her eyes flickered between Tom and Emily before narrowing. You've got to be kidding me, she spat, her voice laced with venom. I knew it. Tom looked like a cornered animal. Jess, please. It's not. Jessica didn't even let him finish. She lunged, throwing a wild punch that landed squarely on Tom's jaw. The crack echoed through the room, and Tom stumbled back, holding his face. Jessica! I reached out to stop her before she did any more damage, but she whirled around and shoved me instead. And you, she jabbed a finger at my chest. Why didn't you see this sooner? You let this happen. I blinked at her, stunned. What are you talking about? She was trembling, more with rage than sadness. We should have known better. Look at us. We let them turn us into fools. Her words hit hard. She was right. We'd been blind, trusting. And now we were standing in the wreckage of something we thought was unbreakable. Tom tried to steady himself, wiping blood from his lip. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he muttered. Emily burst into tears. Carter, please. I didn't mean. I held up my hand. Stop. My voice was quieter now, but the weight of it shut her up. You meant every second of it. You just never thought you'd get caught? Jessica let out a bitter laugh. Exactly. She looked at me, her anger softening just a bit. What now? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that everything I'd believed in had been shattered, and the only person in that room who understood how I felt was Jessica. We stood there, two betrayed spouses in a room full of lies and broken promises. I looked at her, and for the first time that day, I saw something other than anger in her eyes. Let's burn it down, she muttered. I frowned. What? Her lips curled into a wry smile. Not literally, but if they want to play dirty, why not show them what that really looks like? A slow, bitter grin spread across my face. You're serious? As a heart attack, she replied. And just like that, the seeds of revenge were planted. After the explosion of that awful day, Jessica and I became something. Not friends exactly. More like battle-weary soldiers bonded by the same war. The kind of people who knew exactly what the other was thinking without speaking. We both knew that forgiveness wasn't coming, at least not for a long time. The betrayal cut too deep. In the days that followed, the house felt like a tomb. Emily moved out to give me space, though we both knew she wasn't coming back. Not really. I found myself pacing the empty living room, staring at the indentation on the couch where she used to sit, as though the past might rewind if I looked long enough. It didn't. Jessica called a week later, her voice dry and practical. Carter, she said, are you moping? I scoffed. No. You sound like you're moping. There was a pause. Come out. I'm buying you a drink. I hesitated, but eventually gave in. A stiff drink, and someone who got it sounded better than sitting alone in my pity party. We met at a dive bar 3 blocks away, a dim place with sticky floors and cheap beer. Jessica was already at the counter when I arrived, sipping something clear and strong. She raised her glass as I slid onto the stool next to her. To bad decisions, she said. I clinked my glass against hers. To people who make bad decisions for us. The first drink hit hard, burning its way down like gasoline. By the second, we were swapping stories. Do you know, Jessica began, twirling the rim of her glass, Tom once bought me a vacuum for our anniversary? She rolled her eyes. A vacuum, Carter. I choked on my drink. Please tell me it wasn't one of those industrial-sized ones. She snorted. It was. I laughed until my ribs hurt, the sound foreign but good. When I caught my breath, I said, Emily once gave me a romantic coupon book. You know, those cheesy, handmade things. I opened it and guess what the first coupon was? Jessica leaned in, curious. A coupon for 1 free week of me not being on my phone. I shook my head. She was serious. Jessica howled, nearly spilling her drink. We laughed like lunatics, two people who'd had their hearts stomped on, but were finding some strange solace in the ridiculousness of it all. Then the laughter died down, and reality crept back in like a shadow. Jessica stared at her empty glass. "Why do people do it?" she asked quietly. "Why lie? Why throw away something good?" I didn't have an answer. I stared at the amber liquid in my glass and shrugged. "Because they think they deserve more." Jessica nodded slowly. "Then maybe we should give them exactly what they deserve." I raised an eyebrow. "You're really stuck on this revenge thing, huh?" "Damn right I am," she said, eyes glinting. "Think about it. We've been humiliated, left to pick up the pieces while they skip off into the sunset like the stars of some cheesy love affair. And everyone thinks we're just supposed to take it. But what if we didn't?" I leaned back, considering. "Okay, what's the plan?" Jessica smirked. "Oh, I have ideas." And she did. Her first plan was simple but effective. Ruin their perfect little world one awkward moment at a time. It wasn't enough to hurt them. We wanted them to squirm. We wanted them to feel what it was like to be in our shoes. It started with petty pranks. Jessica sent an anonymous text to Tom's office, pretending to be a concerned client who heard rumors about his unprofessional behavior. I dropped a fake spa reservation in Emily's name at the most expensive retreat in town and let her pay the cancellation fee when they couldn't find her. We laughed over each win like kids getting away with something at recess. The bitterness started to lift, replaced by a strange sort of camaraderie. We weren't broken anymore. We were a team. But as the drinks kept flowing, there was a quiet moment where Jessica looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You deserve better, you know?" I swallowed hard. "You too." We sat there in silence, two wounded people finding strength not in what was lost, but in what came next. And for the first time since it all began, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, my head was pounding from all the drinks, but my resolve was crystal clear. Jessica and I were in this together. If Tom and Emily thought they could play games with our lives, they were about to learn that we weren't just pawns. We were the whole damn chessboard. Jessica was waiting for me at the coffee shop down the street. She already had a notebook open, filled with scribbled ideas. I slid into the booth, still half asleep, as she pushed a coffee toward me. "All right," she said with a grin. "Let's get to work." The first plan was genius in its simplicity. Emily and Tom had begun doing their morning yoga sessions at the community park, like the picture-perfect couple they wanted everyone to believe they were. So Jessica hired a street performer to play the bagpipes, terribly, right next to them. The first time, Tom tried to find his zen, while the man blared a screeching rendition of Scotland the Brave. Emily was so annoyed that she packed up her mat early and stormed off. We watched from a safe distance, tears of laughter streaming down our faces. "I can't believe you actually found a guy with a kilt," I wheezed. Jessica wiped her eyes. "Worth every penny." Next, we stepped things up a notch. We, accidentally, sent flowers to Emily's work with a note that read, "I'll always love you. Tom," signed with Jessica's name. That same afternoon, Tom got a delivery at his office, a package of prenatals with a card that read, "Surprise. Can't wait to grow our family." By the end of the day, their social circles were buzzing with questions. Friends whispered. Colleagues speculated. Jessica and I? We just sat back and watched it all unravel. But it wasn't all mischief and laughter. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd catch myself thinking about Emily, the way her hair smelled when she hugged me, the way her laugh used to fill the house. I'd wonder what I could have done differently, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. One night, Jessica must have sensed the same heaviness because she called out of the blue, "Carter?" Her voice was softer than usual. "Yeah." She hesitated. "We're not just doing this for revenge, right?" I exhaled slowly. "No. I think we're doing it to remind ourselves we're still alive." Silence lingered between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "Come over," she finally said. "I'm making popcorn. We'll watch something ridiculous." I smiled. On my way. When I arrived, she was sitting cross-legged on the couch in sweats, holding the biggest bowl of popcorn I'd ever seen. We didn't talk much. We just watched an old comedy, laughing at the absurdity of it all until our worries faded. As I was leaving, she walked me to the door and caught my arm. "For what it's worth," she said, meeting my eyes, "you're handling this better than most people would." "So are you," I replied. She smiled, but there was something different in that smile now, something softer. The next morning, we kicked off the final phase of our plan, a neighborhood potluck. It was supposed to be a light-hearted event, but Jessica and I had a twist planned. The theme? Unbreakable bonds. We made sure everyone knew that Jessica and I were hosting together. Emily and Tom, predictably, showed up holding hands, their smiles plastered on like masks. I could practically hear Emily's internal monologue. "Look at us. We're fine. Everyone loves us." Halfway through the event, Jessica and I stood up for a toast. "To all the wonderful couples here today," Jessica began, her voice smooth as silk. "And to the lessons we learn when things fall apart," I added, lifting my glass. Emily's face paled. Tom shifted uncomfortably. The room went quiet as Jessica continued. "Sometimes, you think you've lost everything only to realize you've found something even better." She looked directly at me when she said it, and for a moment, the world felt like it was holding its breath. As we clinked our glasses and smiled, Emily and Tom's forced grins faltered. They looked like they wanted to sink into the floor. It wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about moving on, and they could see it in our eyes. Later that night, Jessica and I sat on my porch under the stars, exhausted but content. "You know," I said, staring up at the sky, "I think I'm finally done." Jessica leaned her head on my shoulder. "Me too." And that was when it hit me. What started as revenge had turned into something else entirely. Something real. Something better. The aftermath of the potluck was like the slow unraveling of a threadbare sweater. The neighborhood was buzzing, whispers flying from house to house. Emily and Tom tried to put on a brave face, pretending everything was fine, but their smiles were thinner than tissue paper. Meanwhile, Jessica and I felt lighter, freer, but we both knew the storm wasn't over. It came a week later, in the form of a showdown that none of us could have predicted. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was running errands when my phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "Meet me at the cafe. Emily's here." It's bad. My heart dropped. I could feel trouble brewing before I even stepped inside. When I arrived, Jessica was standing near the counter, arms folded tightly across her chest. And there was Emily, pale, agitated, and visibly fraying at the edges. The moment she saw me, Emily rushed over. "Carter, we need to talk." Her voice cracked. I exchanged a glance with Jessica. She arched an eyebrow, silently daring Emily to continue. "Go on," I said, keeping my voice calm. Emily's eyes were wild, desperate. "What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this to us?" Jessica snorted, unable to contain herself. "Us?" she repeated, incredulous. "You mean you and your affair partner?" Emily shot her a glare but kept her focus on me. "Carter, you're better than this." I clenched my jaw, feeling the sting of her words. "Better than what, Emily? Better than you? Better than revenge? Or better than standing up for myself after you shattered our marriage?" Emily flinched but pushed forward. "It was a mistake. A horrible mistake. But you can't punish me forever." Jessica took a step forward, her voice cutting like a blade. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And Carter isn't punishing you. He's moving on." Emily turned to Jessica with venom in her eyes. "Stay out of this. You don't know what Carter and I had." Jessica's smile was razor-sharp. "Oh, trust me, I know exactly what you had. Because he's told me everything. And unlike Tom, I don't take good people for granted." The cafe grew quiet as people noticed the scene unfolding. I could feel their eyes on us, but I didn't care. Emily's anger cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Carter, please," she whispered. "I miss you." There it was, the confession I'd once prayed for. But instead of the relief I'd imagined, all I felt was nothing. No longing, no desire to fix things. Just emptiness where love used to be. I shook my head. "It's too late, Emily. You didn't just cheat. You made me question everything. And I can't come back from that." Jessica touched my arm, her presence grounding me. You don't owe her anything, she said softly. Emily's composure shattered. She wiped her face, her expression twisting into something bitter. So that's it? You're just going to run off with her and pretend we didn't matter? I sighed, exhaustion settling over me. We mattered once, but you destroyed that. And now, I deserve to be happy. And Jessica? She's part of that. Emily's face hardened, the last of her vulnerability slipping away. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stormed out, shoving the door open with so much force that the bell above it clanged angrily. The cafe slowly returned to normal as Jessica and I stood there, still processing what had just happened. You okay? Jessica asked, searching my face. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was true. I think so. She nudged me with her shoulder, a small smile playing on her lips. You handled that like a pro? I laughed, a quiet, tired laugh. Did I? Jessica's smile widened. Absolutely. Though I was kind of hoping she'd throw a latte at me. Would have made a great story. I chuckled despite myself. Let's hope we've had enough drama for one lifetime. We left the cafe together, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The weight of the past felt a little lighter now, like I'd finally let go of the last piece holding me back. As we walked side by side, Jessica reached for my hand. I didn't hesitate. Our fingers intertwined like they'd always belonged there. That was intense, she murmured. Yeah, I agreed. Then I gave her a sideways glance, a grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. Think Tom's next? Jessica laughed, the sound warm and real. Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. But honestly, I don't even care anymore. And in that moment, I realized I didn't either. Our revenge wasn't about hurting them anymore. It was about reclaiming ourselves. And with Jessica by my side, I felt like I'd finally done just that. In the weeks that followed the confrontation with Emily, life began to feel normal again. But not the kind of normal where I was just surviving. This was a better kind of normal. The kind where I woke up without a pit in my chest. The kind where I laughed because I wanted to, not because I was pretending. Jessica and I spent more and more time together, but it wasn't just about plotting revenge anymore. Our late-night brainstorming sessions had turned into movie marathons and quiet conversations about everything. Our childhoods, our dreams, even our fears. One evening, after a long walk through the park, we sat on a bench watching the sunset. The sky was a smear of oranges and purples, the kind of sky that makes you wonder how something so beautiful can exist after everything you've been through. Jessica stretched her legs out in front of her and sighed. You ever think about what's next? I glanced at her. What do you mean? She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I mean this. She gestured between us. Us. Where we're headed. I thought about it for a second and then smiled. I don't think I've ever been more sure of anything. She looked at me with wide eyes, like she wasn't used to hearing things like that. Then she smiled. Really smiled. Good answer. We sat there in comfortable silence until the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew cooler. That night, I realized something important. I didn't just care about Jessica because she understood my pain. I cared about her because she made me feel alive. She made me feel like myself again. A few weeks later, I made it official. I took her out to a quiet dinner at a little Italian restaurant, the kind with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. And after dessert, I reached across the table, took her hand, and said, Jessica, I've been through hell, and you've been there with me every step of the way. You've been my partner, my friend, and more. Her eyes softened, and I saw a flicker of recognition in them before I even finished. I don't want to go another day without making it official. Will you marry me? Her jaw dropped, and for a second, I thought she was going to throw her glass of wine at me. But instead, she laughed. This beautiful, loud laugh that made everyone in the restaurant turn to look at us. Yes, she practically shouted. Of course I will. The restaurant erupted in applause, but I barely noticed. I was too busy looking at her, wondering how someone so unexpected could become everything I needed. In the days that followed, we decided to do something that would either go down as legendary or completely insane. We invited Emily and Tom to the wedding. Jessica's idea, of course. Why? I asked, half laughing when she brought it up. Do you really want to see their faces? Jessica's eyes sparkled with mischief. Oh, I need to see their faces. So we sent the invitations. And when the RSVPs came back, we weren't surprised to see their names on the list. They're coming, Jessica said with a grin as she read the response. Of course they are. The day of the wedding was perfect. Blue skies, a warm breeze, everything falling into place. Jessica looked stunning in her dress, and when I saw her walking down the aisle, everything else disappeared. There was no Emily, no Tom, just us. But when I glanced over at the small group of guests, I caught a glimpse of Emily's face. She looked frozen, her mouth slightly open as if she still couldn't believe what was happening. Tom looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Jessica and I exchanged vows filled with humor and honesty, promising to love each other for who we were, not for what we'd lost. When it was time for the toasts, Jessica stood up with a glass in her hand. To everyone who believed in second chances, she began, her voice clear and strong. And to the people who taught us that sometimes losing what you thought was perfect can lead you to something real. I raised my glass, catching her gaze. To unexpected beginnings. The applause was deafening, but I could still hear Tom and Emily's uncomfortable clapping as they shifted in their seats. As Jessica and I took to the dance floor, I caught Emily watching, her face a mixture of regret and something else, something like understanding. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I felt free. Jessica leaned into me as we swayed to the music. Think they'll last, she whispered. I laughed softly. Honestly, I don't care. She smiled and kissed me, and the world melted away. That was our revenge. Not the pranks or the awkward public moments. Our revenge was living the life we'd rebuilt, better, stronger, and on our own terms. And as we danced under the soft glow of the string lights, I knew this was only the beginning.